What is the problem with these imported locks? Here's the secret they don't want you to know. Welcome. This is Traditional Muzzleloader. My name is Steve Sells, and today's topic is reliability with flintlocks. Now, when I first started in muzzleloading in the early 1980s, the advice I was given is don't buy a flintlock until you can afford a custom-made rifle with a good quality lock. And that advice has served me well. Now, to illustrate my point, I'm going to show you a short clip of a video I took from YouTube that will illustrate much better than I can explain the problems with imported flintlocks. The gentleman you're going to see is using a very popular imported flintlock rifle, and the issues that you will see happening are very common for these rifles. So what you just observed is what we would call a flash in the pan 3 times in a row, where the priming powder ignited, but it didn't set off the main charge in the barrel. And that was followed by 2 events that we call a clatch, where the flint strikes the frizzen, but doesn't put enough sparks into the pan to ignite the priming charge. And finally, you saw a pretty good demonstration of a hang fire. You know, just it sounds like a clatch, whoosh, boom. And none of that is going to inspire confidence in your rifle. In fact, the level of frustration with that kind of a flintlock is enough to take the fun out of anything. Now, a flintlock is a much more complex mechanism than a percussion lock is. And in order for a flintlock to be reliable, it has to be made out of quality parts. They have to be hand polished and tuned and fitted properly. The geometry has to be correct on the tumbler and the cock. The frizzen on a custom lock will be hardened through and through and tempered to the proper hardness to spark good sparks. Also, on your custom locks, the springs are going to be balanced correctly. In other words, the tension of the main spring and the tension on the frizzen spring have to be matched in order to get proper ignition. Now, I'm told that the strength of the main spring should be 3 times stronger than the strength of the frizzen spring. Now, I have no evidence to back up those proportions, but I do know this. If those 2 springs aren't balanced properly, you're going to have unreliable performance from your lock. If the main spring is too strong, it's going to break your flints. If it's too weak, it won't have enough speed and force to properly spark your frizzen. If the frizzen spring is too strong, your frizzen may not completely open the pan and jam up your flint. If that spring is too weak, it can allow the frizzen to bounce back and close on your flint after your shot, which will break off your flint. So, what is the problem with these imported locks? Well, here's the secret they don't want you to know. They don't make locks designed to be reliable because they can't sell a quality lock at the price point and profit margin that they want. They hope that you will believe the myth that they have created themselves, which is flintlocks are inherently unreliable, or that you just don't know how to operate it. And that is simply not true. Now I'm going to show you a short clip from a video that was made about 9 years ago while I was shooting my Chiefs grade trade gun on a trail walk during a rendezvous. Now this gun is a semi-custom gun. The price on that gun is about the same as you would pay for any of the top of the line imported guns. But I want you to pay close attention to the speed of ignition. Now on this particular shot, I had run out of 4F powder, which I normally prime the pan with, and I had primed it with the 2F powder from the horn. Now this isn't an unusual example. This is how that gun fires every single time I pull the trigger. So that's not an unusual example of how a quality flintlock should work. Now, with the imported guns, the biggest problem is just the poor quality of the locks. The parts are not substantial enough to stand up to wear and tear. They're not polished. They're not hand-tuned, so you can't expect good performance from those locks. Now, if you just want a gun that looks like a flintlock to display, and you're only going to maybe take it out occasionally to plink with it, then that might meet your need. But if you want a flintlock to hunt or to shoot in competition, something that only goes off once out of every 6 tries is not going to meet your needs at all. Now, additionally to the poor quality of the lock that is not tuned or designed to really be reliable, what you noticed in that first clip where you saw the flash in the pans, where the priming powder ignites but doesn't ignite the main charge in the barrel, well, that is always caused by an obstruction in the vent. Now, even a good quality lock can have a flash in the pan or a misfire like that if you're not paying close attention to cleaning the interior of that flash hole or using a vent pick to make sure it's clear. But on these imported rifles that are produced in a factory on an assembly line, they often have built-in obstructions because of poor placement of the vent hole. And I'm going to show you a couple of photos that are taken from one of these imported guns that will demonstrate, where you can see it, how the vent plug can be blocked when it's not located properly. And I'm going to show you another photo of how they attempted to correct that. And none of that is good. This photograph shows how the hole for the vent liner was drilled too far back on the barrel, and it's actually obstructed by the breech plug, and that's not going to allow the hot gas from your priming charge to ignite the main charge inside your barrel. And this photograph shows an attempt to solve the problem by filing a notch or a groove in the face of the breech plug. That's not good. It's also not going to solve the problem, because you can imagine how quickly that little groove is going to fill up with fouling and cause an obstruction. And the problem is, once that rifle is assembled, you're not going to be able to see that. Had this gun not been disassembled to be refinished, that wouldn't have been found at all. Now, another issue with a poorly made flintlock is the alignment of the lock itself in the stock of the gun in order to place the pan and the vent in the proper locations. I'll show you a photograph here in a minute that illustrates where the vent hole should be located in relation to the pan on your flintlock. If it isn't located properly, you're not going to have good transmission of your flame and hot gases of your priming charge into the barrel where your main charge lies. Now, that cannot be easily corrected if it's done improperly. And the chances of all this stuff being done on an assembly line where everything lines up and everything is correct are just so slim. Now, I know that someone out there is going to comment, well, I have an imported rifle that's an XYZ brand, and I've had no problems with it. It works just fine. Well, occasionally the stars are going to align, and one rifle is going to come off an assembly line that doesn't have any of these issues, or at least not all of them. So my answer to that person is, congratulations, you won the Flintlock lottery. But everyone's not going to be so fortunate. And even if that traditional style imported Flintlock assembly line rifle does function properly for you, because the parts inside that lock are not properly hardened and they're not as substantial as they should be, that lock's going to wear out. And I'm not speculating on that. For years, I had 2 percussion rifles that are imported, and even though a percussion lock is simpler and will function properly with just a little tweaking, the parts inside those locks were so soft and so fragile that after a period of time, they just simply wore out. The arms on the sears were not stout enough to withstand the pounding they received from the set triggers, and those arms would bend. And that made it practically impossible to keep those triggers adjusted properly. One of my locks, the fly in the tumbler wore out, and it allowed the sear to drop into the half cock notch when I was shooting a competition and broke the notch off of the lock. The other one of those rifles, it wore out to the point where the nose of the sear actually wore down to the point where it wouldn't engage the half cock notch or the full cock notch safely, and I had to stop using that. Now, that is such a common problem with those imported locks that one of the custom lock makers, specifically the L&R Lock Company, they make a replacement lock for those rifles. Now, that lock that I replaced it with cost around $150, which was considerably more than the kit for those rifles cost originally. But the barrels on those rifles shot so well that I considered it to be a good investment to replace those terrible locks with a good L&R lock. Now, it takes a little bit of mechanical skill and a little bit of carving skill to get those in, but replacing the locks on those 2 rifles put them back into service. They still shoot exceptionally well. Those locks are going to outlast me, and they perform as a rifle should. So here's the truth as I see it. Flintlock rifles are not unreliable, but there are some truths that are undeniable. If you expect a flintlock to perform with enough reliability to hunt with or to shoot competitions and trail walks with, you have to have a custom-made lock. The other undeniable truth is you have to use real black powder in a flintlock. A flintlock just can't generate enough heat to ignite the substitute powders that we have available today. Now, in order to get reliable performance, even from a very good quality lock, you have to follow a good cleaning routine and a good maintenance routine. Now, we've covered some of this before, but it doesn't hurt to go over it again. When you have a flash in the pan, there's an obstruction in your vent. Most likely, you didn't get all the fouling out of the vent liner or off of your breech face, and the pressures of firing the gun have blown that crud back into your vent, causing an obstruction. So proper cleaning will prevent that, as will using a vent pick to clear the vent when you load the rifle. Now, if you're having a clatch and it's not igniting your priming charge, then you're not getting proper amount of sparks off of your frizzen. So the most common cause for that is just a dull flint. Another cause for it is not properly lubricating the lock. So the lock is not moving fast enough with enough energy to scrape those small fragments of steel off of the frizzen, which is what produces your sparks. Now, sometimes you can get a clatch and not enough sparks because fouling has built up on the face of your frizzen or on the edge of your flint. So just wipe that clear with a clean, dry cloth and you won't have those issues. Now, another thing that I have seen occasionally is a lock that's damaged just from misuse. Now, this is a Chambers solder lock, and I really like Jim Chambers locks. I think I don't think you can do any better. But some people will tell you that it's okay to practice dry firing with your set trigger and your cock and half cock. Do not do that. The force from that set trigger lever pounding upon that sear arm can break the half cock notch or the nose of your sear. So never dry fire your set triggers on a flintlock unless you put a flint or a piece of wood shaped like a flint in the cock. Now, that's going to allow the resistance of the frizzen and the frizzen spring to absorb the shock of the cock slamming forward when you trip the triggers. And because the cock is not locked into either the half cock notch or all the way forward, then that sear lever can move when the set trigger slams into it, and it won't cause any damage at all to your triggers or your locks. And you can dry fire that flintlock just as often as you want to practice, as long as you have a wooden flint installed in the cock and you're allowing it to strike the frizzen. So once again, I'm going to show you a little video of this rifle being fired just to remind you that a good quality flintlock is just as reliable as any other style of gun. So I hope you enjoyed our video today, and this does conclude my series on the flintlocks. Until the next time, Remember to shoot straight and keep what powder you may have dry.